There's always that one family member who manages to suck the air out of the room the moment they open their mouth. For me, that person is my older brother, Connor. I'm Austin, 29, and I've spent the better part of my adult life trying to distance myself from his shadow. Partly because everyone kept telling me I was lucky to have such a successful brother, and partly because I knew better. On paper, Connor looked like the golden child, business degree, flashy car, loud confidence. But I knew the reality was a lot messier, and underneath the shiny LinkedIn profile was a guy playing house in a crumbling apartment, lying to everyone, including himself. I never thought I'd be the kind of person to say this, but Christmas with my family feels more like a performance than a celebration. Mom makes the same 3 casseroles she's been making since 2006. Dad pretends to understand TikTok to bond with my younger cousins, and Connor always finds a way to turn every story back to himself. This year was no different, except for one thing. I came in knowing something he didn't. And that knowledge, quiet and patient, was the only reason I didn't walk out the second he opened his mouth. Let me back up a little. I work in UX design, nothing glamorous, but it pays well, and I like the projects. I keep a pretty low profile, never been one to brag about what I do or what I've accomplished. Which is probably why, in our family, it's easy for Connor to play the role of the successful one, while I'm cast as the guy who never quite figured it out. It's not that my parents are cruel or anything. They're just impressionable. Connor talks fast, dresses sharp, and always seems to have some big project in the works, so they eat it up. Meanwhile, I show up in jeans and a hoodie and quietly bring the wine. And somehow I'm the one who needs career advice. Our relationship has always been a little strained. Growing up, Connor was the classic older brother, competitive, dismissive, and always one step ahead. He was the kid who turned in my homework late just to mess with me, then told Mom I must have forgotten it. He once convinced a teacher I cheated on a group project because he wanted to work with someone else. He's charming when he wants to be, which means he gets away with a lot. But charm fades when you spend your whole life burning bridges. And recently, one of those bridges happened to lead straight back to me. About a year ago, I reconnected with my old college roommate, Marco. Great guy, studied architecture while I was drowning in design theory. We shared a tiny off-campus apartment for 2 years, and while we lost touch for a while after graduation, we recently started grabbing coffee again every few months. Turns out, Marco owns a few properties now, small-time landlord stuff, nothing sketchy, and surprise, surprise, one of his tenants was none other than my brother, Connor. At first, I didn't say anything. I figured it was a coincidence, and maybe Connor had finally gotten his act together. But every time Marco brought up this nightmare tenant who always has excuses, dodges repairs, and plays loud music until 3 a.m., I had a sinking feeling. Then he mentioned the tenant's name, and I had to choke on my latte. Apparently, Connor had no idea Marco and I even knew each other, let alone had history. Which made things interesting. Because Marco, being the decent guy he is, didn't want to evict someone over minor annoyances, but the list was getting longer. Unpaid rent, unauthorized guests, a dog he wasn't supposed to have. Marco was frustrated, but still giving him the benefit of the doubt. I told him to keep me out of it. I didn't want to get involved in my brother's mess. At least, not unless I had to. And then came Christmas. We do it at my parents' house every year. There's no snow. This is Southern California. But Mom still insists on putting on that fireplace video on the TV like it'll make the house feel cozier. I showed up with a bottle of wine, wearing my usual low-effort flannel, and tried to blend into the corner like always. My cousins were already there, scrolling on their phones, and Dad gave me a distracted, "Hey, kiddo," before going back to carving the ham. Connor, naturally, arrived late and loud, wearing a blazer over a turtleneck like he was about to give a TED Talk. He greeted everyone with hugs and backslaps and "Merry Christmas, fam," before plopping himself at the head of the table like a king returning from battle. I kept quiet for most of the meal. Listened to Connor talk about his latest client, some vague real estate gig he was trying to spin as a startup. Mom beamed every time he spoke, asking follow-ups like she was interviewing him for a magazine. Dad nodded along like he understood every word. Nobody asked me about work, but I didn't mind. I was used to it. It wasn't until dessert that things took a turn. The table was full: apple pie, gingerbread, that weird Jell-O salad my aunt still insists on making. And I was mid-bite when Connor leaned back in his chair, looked around the room, and said, You know, it's kind of funny. Everyone always said we were the smart kids. But you look around, and I guess not everyone lives up to that potential. I froze. At first, I thought he was making some general comment. But then he looked directly at me. Smirked. I mean, Austin's got a degree and all, but not much to show for it, huh? The room went quiet. A few awkward chuckles. Mom gave a nervous Connor, like maybe she thought he was joking. But he wasn't. He was smiling. That smug, self-satisfied look he'd been wearing since high school, like he just dunked on someone and wanted the world to know. I could feel the heat rise in my chest, but I forced a smile. Just nodded. Yeah, I said softly. Guess some of us just peak early. He laughed. Hey, no shame in being average. Someone's got to be the baseline, right? It stung more than I expected. I'd learned to tune Connor out over the years, but something about the way he said it, so casual, so public, made it harder to swallow. I looked around the table. No one said anything. Not Dad. Not my cousins. Just silence and shifting glances. I realized, in that moment, that they all kind of believed him. Maybe they always had. And that's when I pulled out my phone. I didn't say a word. Just opened a message thread with Marco and typed, Hey, just curious. Did Connor ever pay that November rent? Marco responded within seconds. Nope. And now there's a leak in the ceiling from his unit. Caught him hosting an Airbnb guest again too. What? I stared at the screen for a second, then typed back. Can you send me a list of all the violations you've got documented? He replied with a PDF. I stared at that PDF from Marco like it was a grenade waiting for me to pull the pin. I hadn't planned on using it. Not tonight. Not on Christmas. But something about the way Connor humiliated me at the dinner table, so smug, so confident, flicked a switch I didn't even realize was still wired. I didn't say anything. Just saved the file. Locked my phone. Took another bite of pie. But I wasn't tasting anything anymore. My mind was buzzing. The rest of the night passed in that awkward, plastic smile kind of way. Connor kept holding court like he was the guest of honor instead of just the loudest guy in the room. I caught my mom giving me a few worried glances, but she didn't say anything. She never does. I stayed quiet because I was used to it. The being overlooked, the snide remarks, the silent expectation that I'd just brush it off and keep the peace. But that night was different. Something had cracked. The next morning, I woke up with that PDF still on my mind. I stared at it again over coffee. The list of violations was even longer than I remembered. Multiple months of partial rent, documented parties, unapproved pets, unauthorized subletting, and one line that stood out like a siren. Threatened to sue when warned of eviction. I didn't text Marco. Not yet. Instead, I tried to focus on the rest of the holidays. We still had a few more days before everyone flew back to their corners of the country. And I'll be honest, I told myself I wouldn't do anything, that it wasn't worth the fallout. But then Connor opened his mouth again. It started subtle. The next day, we were all in the living room, watching some half-baked Netflix holiday movie while Mom passed around leftover cookies. My younger cousin Evan was asking me about UX design. He's just starting college, super curious, and I was walking him through some basic principles of interface psychology when Connor piped up from across the room. You really gonna bore the kid to death with button layouts and scroll bars? I laughed it off. So did Evan. But Connor kept going. I mean, come on. No offense, Austin, but if I wanted a tutorial on making apps no one uses, I'd just Google it. The room went quiet again. Evan gave me a sheepish look. It's cool. I'm actually into it. Connor cut him off. Nah, man. Don't waste your time. Learn something that'll actually make you money. And again, just like that, everyone froze. My mom gave him a half-hearted Connor. Be nice. But he waved her off like he was doing me a favor. The worst part? I didn't say anything. I just sat there, heart pounding, feeling like I was 16 again and being mocked for choosing art electives over debate team. Later that night, while most of the family was outside watching my little cousins try to light sparklers in the cold, I caught Connor alone in the kitchen, pouring himself a drink. I walked in, not planning anything, just needing to say something. You know, I said quietly, you don't have to talk to me like that. He didn't even turn around. Like what? Like I'm a joke. He laughed. Come on, man. Don't be so sensitive. It's just brotherly banter. Feels a lot more like targeted humiliation. Finally, he looked at me. Smirked. If you can't handle a little teasing, maybe that says more about you than me. And then he walked past me like I wasn't even there. That was the moment I knew I was done. The rest of the visit was just Connor being Connor. At brunch, he told my aunt I was between jobs, even though I've been at the same company for 3 years. At game night, he made a crack about me living alone in a studio with zero prospects, when I actually own my place and have more savings than he probably realizes. Every time he spoke, it was like he was trying to shrink me down, word by word. But the real breaking point came on the final night. We were all packed into the living room again. Mom had made hot cocoa. Dad was telling one of his long-winded stories about how he used to hitchhike to college in the 70s. Connor was scrolling on his phone, half listening, when my mom said something that made my jaw clench. She looked over at Connor and said, "You know, I've been meaning to talk to you about that rental situation. Austin mentioned your landlord's been difficult." Connor raised an eyebrow and looked at me. "You told her that?" I blinked. "No, I didn't say anything." He scoffed. "Then how would she know?" I turned to Mom. "Where did you hear that?" She looked confused. "Connor mentioned it at dinner a few nights ago. Something about your friend, Marco, is it, harassing him over repairs?" My blood went cold. Connor leaned back with a lazy grin. "Yeah, real piece of work, that guy. Pretends he's this cool landlord, but never fixes anything. I've had to pay out of pocket to get my own stuff fixed." That was a lie. A bold, bald-faced lie. I opened my mouth, but he cut me off. I told him I'd sue if he didn't shape up. I'm not paying full rent to live in a dump. He tried to evict me last month over some nonsense violation. I laughed. Actually laughed out loud. And that's when Connor's eyes narrowed. "What?" he said cold. "Just funny," I replied. "The version you're telling is not what Marco's been documenting." He sat up straighter. "What's that supposed to mean?" I pulled out my phone, opened the PDF, flipped the screen around, and held it up. "This," I said. Everyone leaned in. Connor's face shifted from arrogant to defensive in seconds. "You've been spying on me?" "No. Marco and I are friends. Have been for years. You're the one who decided to rent from someone without realizing he and I were roommates." Mom was already starting to look uncomfortable. "Austin, maybe this isn't the time." "No, Mom," I said quietly. "You wanted to know about his landlord? Here's your answer. Unpaid rent. Unauthorized pets. Subletting. Threats of legal action. You name it." Connor stood up. "You had no right." "I didn't do anything," I said, still holding the phone. "But you did. You've been lying to everyone. About your situation. About your success. About me." His voice got louder. "Oh, get off your high horse. You think this makes you better than me?" "No," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "But it proves I'm not the failure you keep painting me as." The room was dead silent. And then he did something I didn't expect. He looked right at Mom and Dad and said, "You're really gonna let him pull this petty crap? He's just jealous because I've always been the one who actually mattered." That word, mattered, hit me like a slap. I looked at my parents, at my cousins, at everyone who had always quietly let Connor dominate every room, every story, every dinner. And then I did something I'd been holding off for far too long. I opened my messages, tapped Marco's name, typed a single sentence. Send the formal notice. Connor's phone buzzed 5 seconds later. He looked down, read it, went pale. Then, slowly, he looked up at me. "What did you do?" After the yelling, after the accusations, after Connor's voice cracked with rage and his carefully polished mask slipped right off his face, everyone just stood there, stunned, silent, caught between the wreckage of years of unspoken tension and the shock of seeing the successful son unravel like a pulled thread. My parents looked dazed. Mom clutched her mug like it might steady her, eyes flicking between Connor and me, as if searching for some familiar version of her sons that wasn't there anymore. Dad opened his mouth once or twice, but nothing came out. My aunt quietly ushered the younger cousins upstairs, whispering something about letting the adults talk, though we both knew what that really meant was "this is ugly, and I don't want to deal with it." Connor stormed out that night, not just from the house, but from the whole scene, tires screeching on the wet street as he peeled away, phone in hand, already calling someone, his girlfriend maybe, or a lawyer, or just someone who'd tell him what he wanted to hear. He didn't even grab his stuff. The silence after he left was worse than the shouting. No one looked at me. No one said, "Good job," or "You were right." They just dispersed, like my truth had made the air too heavy to breathe. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the edge of my childhood bed, the one with the old posters still taped to the wall and a drawer full of forgotten tech cords, and I stared at the ceiling. The same ceiling I used to stare at after Connor made me cry during arguments, or after another birthday where he got a big gift and I got socks. And I wondered if maybe I'd made a mistake. Not because I was wrong, but because, even after all this time, a part of me still wanted their approval. And what I got instead was a living room full of silence and a family splintered down the middle. The next morning, no one brought it up. Not even a whisper. I came downstairs to the smell of burnt toast and the clink of silverware on plates. Mom was at the sink, humming, actually humming, like she could just rewind the last 12 hours and pretend it never happened. Dad read the paper like a man hiding behind ink and headlines. My aunt made a joke about the weather. I sat down and ate quietly, waiting for someone to break the script. No one did. When I left that day, my mom hugged me tightly, like she was trying to hold on to a version of me she could understand. "You're a good person, Austin," she said softly, not quite looking me in the eyes. "I know you were just trying to help." I smiled politely and didn't ask her who she thought I was helping. Back in my apartment, it felt like winter had followed me home. I kept waiting for the guilt to kick in, the kind that always showed up when I did something Connor didn't like. But it didn't come. Not this time. What came instead was silence and peace. No more comparing myself to his fake milestones. No more biting my tongue. Just a strange, unfamiliar quiet that settled over my small apartment like a blanket. It wasn't victory. Not yet. But it was something. I spent New Year's Eve alone, and for once, I didn't mind. While the world screamed through fireworks and champagne, I sat on my balcony with a whiskey and a notebook. Not my laptop, just pen and paper. I hadn't journaled in years, but something about seeing Connor fall apart made me want to reassemble myself, piece by piece. So I wrote about how small I'd let myself feel, about how I downplayed every success to avoid making waves, about how tired I was of making myself digest my own dignity just to keep the family peace. And I made a promise, not a resolution, just a quiet contract with myself, that I was done performing. I wasn't going to be the shadow anymore. I wasn't going to keep trimming myself down to make other people comfortable. I was going to take up space. The first thing I did was redesign my portfolio. Not because I needed a new job, I liked mine, but because I realized I'd been hiding behind generic bios and safe designs. I added more of my personality, showcased passion projects I used to be embarrassed by, and submitted it to a UX design award program I'd been too nervous to enter before. I didn't expect to win. I just wanted to take the swing. Then I reached out to Marco. I told him I hoped everything went smoothly with the formal notice. He said it did. Connor tried to threaten legal action, but once Marco forwarded the lease terms and violation documents, he went quiet. Apparently, he was trying to find a new place and fast. I told Marco I appreciated him handling it professionally. He replied, "You did the right thing." And hey, karma's patient, but thorough. By February, something had shifted in me. I started saying yes more. To coffee with old friends. To side projects I used to turn down because I didn't think I was good enough. To hiking trails I'd bookmarked but never tried. I stopped waiting for someone to notice me and started noticing myself. It was strange at first, like meeting a version of me that had been waiting behind a locked door for years. But every time I stood up straighter, every time I took a risk or drew a boundary, that version stepped a little closer. Work started picking up too. A manager I admired invited me to collaborate on a major app redesign for a well-known wellness brand. It was the kind of project people fight to get on, and he picked me because, in his words, "You've got the kind of perspective this needs." A year ago, I would have second-guessed myself. Spent days convincing myself he made a mistake. But now I just said, I'd love to. I still hadn't heard from Connor. Not a text, not a call, not even a passive-aggressive post online. Part of me expected him to reach out, maybe with an apology, though that felt laughable, or at least a demand to fix what I broke. But the silence stretched on, and I started realizing it wasn't just distance. It was disinterest, not just on his end, on mine. I didn't miss him. I missed the idea of a brother I never really had. And that was the part that hurt most. Because for years, I kept hoping he'd change. That one day he'd pull me aside, admit he was harsh because he was insecure, or afraid, or just didn't know how to be a good brother. I wanted to believe there was something redeemable under the smirk. But some people don't want redemption. They want control. And once they lose it, they don't come back with grace. Still, my parents kept calling. Every few days, Mom would check in, Ask how work was going. Avoid saying his name, but let it hang in the air like an unspoken ghost. Dad said even less. But he sent me a cryptic text in March. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't feel good, but it still matters. I didn't reply, because by then, I didn't need to be told. I already knew. By April, I got word that I was shortlisted for the UX award. They invited me to a small industry event in New York, and I almost turned it down. Travel, hotels, crowds. But then I remembered who I used to be. And I booked the ticket. I bought a new blazer. I stood in a room full of strangers and introduced myself without apology. I didn't win, but I met a recruiter from a company I'd always admired. We grabbed drinks, talked about design philosophy, about storytelling through interface. He asked if I'd ever considered working internationally. Said they were opening a satellite office in Amsterdam and looking for senior leads. I laughed. That's a long way from LA. He smiled. Sometimes distance gives you perspective. That night, I walked through the city alone, cold wind biting at my face, and I realized something. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Connor. Not at my parents. Not even at myself. I was just free. Free to be whoever I wanted to be. Free from the weight of comparison. Free from the warped narrative I'd been assigned. And yet, just when I thought the chapter was closing, I got a call. Unknown number. Late at night. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity got the better of me. I picked up. There was a pause. A breath. And then a familiar voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it before. Hey, Austin. I need your help. It was Connor. There was a silence on the line that stretched for just a second too long. Not long enough to hang up, but just long enough to feel the weight of whatever was about to come. Connor, I said finally, cautious. He cleared his throat. It was quiet wherever he was. No background noise, no music, no bustling city sounds. Just the low crackle of a cheap phone speaker and breathing. Yeah, it's me. I didn't say anything. Just waited. He let out a soft, humorless laugh. You're probably the last person who wants to hear from me. Still, I stayed silent. Then, almost reluctantly, he continued. Look, I know I've messed things up. And I'm not asking you to forget everything. But I'm kinda in a situation right now. And, well, I didn't know who else to call. It would have been easy to slam the door right there. Hang up. Block the number. Go back to my peaceful, steadily improving life. But something in his voice, something new, or maybe something old that had been buried for years, stopped me. Where are you? I asked quietly. There was a pause. Vegas. Vegas? What are you doing in Vegas? Another pause. I moved out here a few weeks ago. Got a job offer. Thought it'd be a fresh start. I didn't believe him. Not entirely. It didn't line up with the last I'd heard. Marco said he'd been evicted just after New Year's. And I hadn't seen a single sign online of him making a move that big. But I let him talk. And now, he sighed. I lost it. The job. And the place. I've been staying with a friend, but that's not really working out. I thought I had this deal lined up, some marketing gig, but it fell through. I'm out of money, Austin. For a second, I could almost picture him. Disheveled, tired, not the polished version he'd always presented at family events. Not the guy who smirked over ham and pie and talked down to me like I was just a footnote in his biography. But I also remembered what he said that night. How he looked me dead in the eyes and said I was just jealous because he mattered. Funny how people find humility when they've run out of leverage. I'm not calling to ask for money, he added quickly. I know better than that. I heard you know people. Like in design and tech. You know, startup stuff. I raised an eyebrow. Are you asking me for a job referral? No. I mean, maybe. Not a job, exactly. Just an intro. Something. Anything. A foot in the door. The gall. The absolute gall. This man had publicly humiliated me, lied to our family, weaponized their approval like a sword, and now, just a few months later, here he was, hoping I'd forget all of it because he needed something. But I didn't say no. Not yet. Because suddenly, I saw something I hadn't before. An opportunity. Not for petty revenge. Not for public humiliation. But for something more surgical. More deliberate. Something he would never see coming. The old me would have snapped back. Hung up. Fumed. Or worse. Caved, just to keep the peace. But not this version of me. This version smiled. Okay, I said slowly. Let me think about it. He exhaled, a mix of relief and disbelief. Really, I can't promise anything, I added, keeping my voice measured. but I'll see if there's anyone in my network who'd be a fit. Can you send me your resume? There was an awkward pause. Oh yeah? I'll send it tonight. I'll look out for it. We ended the call, and I sat there in the quiet for a long time. Then I opened my laptop, and I started to plan. The first thing I did was open LinkedIn and search his name. His profile was a joke, full of buzzwords, vague consulting roles, and fake titles with no companies attached. His most recent entry said Strategic Growth Executive, Confidential, which meant nothing. The summary section read like it had been copied from a motivational poster. Not a single reference. Not a single real achievement. Just empty noise. But that was useful, because it meant I had a blank canvas. And I knew exactly how to paint it. I called Marco the next morning. Is this about him again? He asked as soon as he picked up. Not exactly, I said. I need a favor. I explained what had happened. The call, the ask, and what I had in mind. Marco was quiet for a second, then laughed. The kind of low, dangerous laugh someone makes when they're remembering every unpaid rent check and late-night noise complaint. I'm in, he said. Really? Oh, absolutely. I've been waiting for an excuse. Next, I reached out to Danny. She was an old classmate of mine, ran a small creative agency that did branding work for startups and mid-sized companies. We weren't super close, but we'd always got along, and she owed me a favor from a contract I'd helped her land the year before. I pitched her the idea gently. I have this guy who's interested in marketing. Bit of a wild card. He's got a, let's say, colorful background. Not sure he's ready for anything real yet, but maybe a test project? Something small. Freelance. She raised an eyebrow. You setting me up with a con artist, Austin? Not exactly, I said. Think of it more like community service. She laughed. Fine, but I get to record the Zoom call. Over the next few days, I built a little ecosystem. A fake opportunity. Not a trap, exactly, just a mirror. One that would show Connor exactly who he really was when there was no family around to lie for him. I sent him a message the following Monday. Hey, talk to someone I know. They're looking for a freelance marketing consultant to help pitch a product to early investors. Could be a good fit. Interested? He replied within 5 minutes. Absolutely. Let me know what I need to do. I sent him Danny's info and told him she'd be in touch. I also gave Danny a short list of things to ask during the call, specific questions that would reveal whether Connor actually knew what he was talking about. Spoiler, he didn't. The call lasted 13 minutes. I know because Danny sent me the timestamp. She started with softballs. Tell me about your last campaign. What were the conversion metrics like? Connor responded with vague phrases like really strong engagement and the team was thrilled, but couldn't name a single figure. She moved on to strategy. Say you have a product aimed at 18 to 25-year-olds, mid-tier pricing, digital distribution. What's your go-to-market plan? Connor paused, then launched into something about Instagram influencers and creating a sense of vibe-centric urgency, which isn't a thing. Finally, she asked him what KPIs he prioritized. He blinked. I mean, all of them. Afterward, she called me, still laughing. That man thought retargeting was a kind of internship. I thanked her, sent her a coffee gift card, and then I messaged Connor. Hey, how'd it go? He replied after an hour. Good. She seemed impressed. I think I nailed it. The delusion was almost impressive. I didn't respond, because now, I had everything I needed. Proof that he couldn't do the job he claimed to want. Proof that he still thought charm would carry him. And most importantly, a reason to make my next move. Because there was one piece left to play. My parents. They still didn't know the full story. They knew things had gone sideways with Connor, but they didn't know about the job lies. The fake credentials. The desperate call. They still clung to the version of him that had strutted into Christmas dinner with his expensive watch and plastic grin. But I was done letting that version stand. So I printed everything. The resume. The fake titles. The message thread. A screenshot from Danny's LinkedIn confirming she had no intention of hiring at this time. And, yes, a snippet of his email to her afterward, where he'd thanked her and said he was excited for next steps. Then I wrote a letter. Not angry. Not petty. Just honest. About who Connor was. About what he'd done. About how long I'd spent being treated like a footnote in my own family. And about why I wasn't going to stay silent anymore. I mailed it to my parents. Then I waited. 3 days after I dropped the letter in the mailbox, my phone buzzed with a voicemail notification. It was from my mom. Her voice trembled like it had back when I first left for college. Except this time, it wasn't pride or sadness. It was fear. Not the dramatic kind, but the quiet, dawning fear of someone who's finally seeing the truth for the first time and realizing just how long they've been looking the other way. Austin, we need to talk. Please call us back. I just want to understand. I didn't call back. Not right away. Because for once, I wasn't the one desperate to make things okay. I let it sit. Let the silence stretch. Let them stew in it the way I had for years. I wasn't trying to punish them, not really. I just didn't want to rush back in like I always did. The old me would have jumped to smooth it over, to reassure them, to make them feel better about the mess they helped enable. The new me? I wanted them to feel it. A few days later, Dad called. He didn't leave a voicemail. He never does. But he texted, "We got your letter. Come by this weekend if you're free." That Saturday, I drove down. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because I needed to see it with my own eyes, whether they'd finally taken the blinders off, or if this was going to be another quiet sweep under the rug moment like everyone before it. When I walked in, the house felt different. Smaller, somehow. Or maybe it was just me that had grown. Mom was in the kitchen, pacing with a dish towel in her hands. Dad stood stiffly by the table, where a printout of Connor's fake resume sat next to a pile of emails and highlighted notes. My letter was on top, folded once, worn around the edges like it had been opened and reread a few too many times. They didn't hug me, didn't smile. Mom gestured toward the table. We went through everything. I nodded. Dad cleared his throat. Is all this accurate? Every word. He looked down, exhaled hard through his nose, and rubbed his forehead. I didn't know it was this bad. I did, I said. For years. Mom sat down, finally. Her voice was soft. Why didn't you tell us earlier? I gave her a long look. Because every time I tried, you made excuses for him. Neither of them said anything. I didn't need them to. The silence was enough. Dad sat down too. He called us. Said you ambushed him. Said you sabotaged his career. Did he also mention how he begged me for help, then lied about a job interview he bombed? He didn't, Dad admitted. Mom looked up at me, her eyes glassy. What did we do wrong? That part almost broke me. Because for all their blind spots, all their enabling, I knew deep down they weren't bad people. Just people who didn't know how to deal with the truth when it clashed with the version of the family they wanted to believe in. You believed what was easy, I said gently. You saw confidence and mistook it for success. You saw silence and mistook it for failure. Mom put a hand to her mouth. I'm sorry, she whispered. I nodded. I know. It wasn't about getting them to grovel. I didn't need that. I just needed the scales to fall from their eyes. For them to finally see me, not as a cautionary tale next to Connor's spotlight, but as a whole person who'd been standing in the wings for too long. They didn't ask me to forgive him. They didn't beg me to reach out. And that told me they finally understood. But I wasn't done yet. Because there was still one more act left in this play, and Connor didn't know the curtains were rising. It started with a job posting. Danny and I crafted it together. A fake startup launching a new wellness app called Saran, sleek, minimalist branding, a full-blown website with mock-ups and team bios, all professionally done. Marco even pitched in and helped write a fake funding announcement on a startup forum to make it look legit. The job posting was simple: marketing lead, remote position, base plus equity. It checked every box Connor had ever claimed to be perfect for. And the best part? We made sure the application process was open, public, and appealing enough that it would cross his radar organically. And it did. Within 48 hours of posting, I got a message from Danny. Guess who just applied? I opened the attachment. His cover letter was a masterpiece of exaggeration, vague buzzwords, fake titles, and a completely fabricated story about scaling a SaaS product to 6 figures in monthly revenue. The man didn't even Google the startup to make sure it existed. He just saw an opportunity and pounced. We gave him an interview. Not with Danny this time. With Marco. He didn't recognize Marco's voice, not over the phone. It had been years, and Marco pitched it up a bit, kept it formal. Asked Connor all the questions Danny had asked. Got the same nonsense answers. Then, at the end of the call, Marco said, just one last thing before we wrap. Sure, Connor replied. You remember not fixing that leaking pipe? The line went silent. Marco didn't wait. You sublet my property illegally, hosted Airbnb guests, lied about repairs, and threatened legal action. You broke the lease and the law. And now you're out here pretending you know how to build companies. Connor stammered. I wait, what? Marco chuckled. Good luck out there, Strategic Growth Executive. You're gonna need it. Click. We didn't hear from him after that. But that wasn't the revenge. Not really. The real blow came a few weeks later. You see, while Connor was busy trying to rebuild his fake persona online, I was talking to a recruiter friend at a real firm. One that actually worked with several startups he was likely to approach. I didn't need to smear him. I didn't need to exaggerate. I just sent over a package. His resume, the transcript from Danny's interview, the audio from Marco's final call, and the real lease violations. I'm not telling you what to do with this, I said. But if his name pops up in your pipeline, you might want to know who you're dealing with. They passed it around their network. Quietly, discreetly. And just like that, doors began closing. Connor didn't know why interviews dried up, why responses turned cold, why gigs he thought he had lined up suddenly ghosted him. Because in a world built on connections, the bridges he'd burned were finally catching fire behind him. Meanwhile, I kept climbing. I got a call from the Amsterdam team I met in New York. They wanted to offer me a lead role, fully remote for the first year, then with relocation support if I wanted it. It was more money than I'd ever made. More freedom, more respect, more creative control. I said yes. When I told my parents, my mom cried. Happy tears this time. Dad asked if I needed help packing. I started selling my furniture. Gave my landlord my notice. Booked a flight for 3 months out. And then, just 2 weeks before I was set to leave, I got one last message. It was from Connor. A text. You destroyed my life. I hope it was worth it. I stared at it for a long time. Then I typed. You destroyed it yourself. I just stopped cleaning up the pieces. He didn't respond. And I didn't need him to. Because I was already gone. From the shadow of his ego. From the weight of our parents' expectations. From the tiny box I'd let myself live in for far too long. My flight to Amsterdam left at 9:35 p.m. on a quiet Thursday night. No drama. No tears. Just me, my carry-on, and a head full of clarity. As the plane ascended, city lights shrinking below me, I looked out the window one last time. And I smiled. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't running from anything. I was walking into something better,